Hello, 100. Welcome back. My name is Tim Zoe. In today's episode, we get to focus on the Android mock interview series. And our main partner today is Speechify. Speechify allows you to upload a PDF or your notes and listen to them as an audiobook, among many other features. In today's series, you are given a repository that has already been set for you with dependencies, dependency injection, dependencies, and anything you will need to get you started for your first round of the mock interview. So the main goal is to use Jetpack Compose to build this. So Speechify uses Jetpack Compose, the recommended UI toolkit for building your mobile apps. Now, we are going to start off. So I'm going to break it down for you into threes. So we're going to do it this way. We have two screens. One, the home screen. Two, the detail screen. So now those are already two packages inside the UI layer. So in the home screen, we're going to break it a little bit more down into the components. The components will hold the book card component, which will hold, that includes the order, the image, the button, and everything else. And then we're going to have the UI state, which will help us monitor when we have errors, we have a success, or we still loading the books from a remote server or the internet. The final bit will be the detail screen and the navigation. And by the way, we will be using type-safe navigation. You can go check out my other channels where we've talked about Android navigation. So let's get started. By the way, you have exactly 1 hour to finish this. So I've attached the repo link on the description. So make sure you go check it out. This is the repository that we will be using. So it was an interview by a company called Speechify. So they mostly deal with PDFs and stuff. So where you get to read the audio and everything else. So within this repo, we had UI challenge. So this was the main task was to build the UI. So with UI, that means we are building from the view model level all through to the UI state screens and navigation and everything. So Hilt was already configured as a dependency. Serialization on this one's already covered. Navigation, Compose, and Coil were already set for you on the dependency level. So the main thing the team was looking at was, can you build the UI as I described? Of course, make the feature work first, and then do the review later. So with these, there were actually four score levels: architecture, how the project is structured, separation of concerns, how mostly these were tested on MVVM architecture. The next one was, of course, Jetpack Compose. Does the UI match? So unfortunately, I can't now get the screenshots. Oh, they're here. Good. So if you look at the book details, this is what was expected. So you have an image, you have the name, the author, and the description. So that was for the book details. So for the book list, there was this design here. So where you have the outline text field or just a text field, and you have an image. We have a column containing 3 text composables and a button. So definitely, I would put it in a card, but for the interview, it was pretty straightforward, no cards and everything else. But in our case, I think adding a card will make more sense to just separate. I don't see the need for this button, but we will build as the UI says. And then there was the search. So we need to search a book. So if you are searching a book, maybe like, so we only need to show the text, the books with those names as you type. So the good thing is, again, on the repository layer, the search function has already been done. So everything was focusing on the UI and the view model. Loading state. So there was the loading state. So this is an image, but for me, because anyway, we're not doing the interview, so we will go with the circular progress indicator. Yes, so I think that is it. Just back to the code. And everything else with the README. So task details was implement the loading screen. So this was the first task. After loading, you display. Then there was some specification on this aspect ratio, the text field for the search. There was also searching by name functionality and everything else. Then there was when you click on the button, you need to move to the detail screen. After, so with that, we will also implement, you might create a job for that to monitor that. And then scrolling content under the system bars, you can use just a scaffold there. landscape organization, and our bonus task was on book image or navigation. Our bonus task on navigation, but so we've done navigation. I've done navigation previously on other episodes, so you can go check it out on my channel if you want to implement the bonus task here. Yeah, and that is it. So I will share the link to this on GitHub. Once you've opened your Android Studio, so you will need to check out the, I have quite a good number of branches here. So there's the initial setup branch. So, and then there's the Speechify walkthrough, which already I submitted that. So for this case, you will need to check out the initial setup repo. For me, I think I'll just use this one instead of recreating another branch. So what was there is, we add the data already set for you. So this one contained the book as the model, and the same again as the DTO here. So we're using the serializable one and to get this ebook of ours. So we have the ID, name, author, image, description, and the rating. Then on DI, this one was already done, the binding has already been done here. So with the module singleton class here, component, and the book repository. So we are binding the book repository here from the books repository implementations. So if you go to the repository layer, there is, of course, do not modify on the code that was there. So there is a function to get the books, then get a specific book by ID, then the search book by the query now. So if you're using the characters to type in, then you just need to use that. Now, this is the repo. Of course, you have to inject the constructor parameter for the context for the book repository. So we've added this implementation of getting books, get the book ID, search. So our focus is not really on the repository layer, as the interview stated. So we want to focus on building the UI. Then we have the JS modules of this, all this. So you can go through the repo and try to understand what was happening. So we can start by checking on the design. So we add on the README, so we add screenshots. So we can start by building the home screen, make sure it's working, it's launching well, and then we can now go to the details screen. So on the books list, so quickly here, from a quick overview is we can use an outline text, then we can have a card with a row holding the image and a column holding this name, author, and the ratings. And then also we can have the detail screen. So we can start off by building the component. So back to Android Studio. So we can actually just close all these tabs. And then I'm going to create, under UI, I'm going to create another package called screens. And under the screens, I'm going to create another new package, call it home screen. Of course, we know it's all about the book, so we don't have to say books home screen. Maybe if we have more modules later, then we can switch to that. So I'm going to create 3 files here. So first one will be the books UI state, where we want to monitor, of course, from the list, the interviewer wanted a loading state, you to catch the error and the success for those books. So I'm going to call it book UI state. It can be a sealed interface. So we can have a sealed interface and an object for loading. So we can say loading. This one will extend the book UI state, so it doesn't take anything. But for our success and error state, so we need for the error, okay, we can finish first with the error here. Data class, we can call it error val message of type string, which of course has to inherit again, extend from the book UI state. So for this, we don't want to add code the error. So we want to get the error directly from the response. So that's why we are taking this parameter here under the UI state. Now again, on data class, we now want to work under assumption that we've already received our books from the response API. So with that one, we can say we're expecting books of type list of the books here. So we're expecting a list of all these books from our book UI state. Yeah, and we're done with the book UI state. So the next thing will be now building our view model. So we can call it, since we've decided to go with, so we can just call it books view model. So first things first will be to inject Hilt at Hilt view model. The next thing will be this one, of course, extends the view model. Then we want to inject at the constructor here. Inject constructor, and our constructor will be repository of type books repository. So if you go to these books, these are the methods we want to directly fetch, use them in the view model. That's why we are injecting this repository right here. So we can just can make it more cleaner. So we can prefer to have them this way. So first things will be declaring our state flows for both. So keep in mind on this repository, apart from the card component, we also need to implement the search functionality. But for now, let's focus more on first getting the app working with the list of books. So here we can say private val. We can have a UI state of books. So we can just call it UI state. UI state equal to, we can use the mutable state flow. Our state flow is the books UI state, and we can start off with a loading state. So loading, yeah, that one we're done. So we need to create an instance for the usability from the UI. So we're going to create we need to expose this to the UI, and we can just expose it directly. So we need to create another UI state of state flow of type state flow. This of course is of type buff, and then we can have the UI state. Yeah, we can have them as state flow. This will make sure that this is only read only, and it cannot be updated from the UI. The next thing is we can just put in here the search query. So we will need to implement the search query. Of course, this will be of course we can have it as okay, just a second here. Private var mutable state flow. Of course, we don't have to declare it as a string. Of course, since it does no direct reference from the other state, then we can just say val search query of type state flow. Of course, it's of type string. You can just equate it state flow of type string. We equate it with the search underscore state flow. Yes. So the other thing will be what I'm envisioning is we will need a job to make sure that once the app is launched or in the process of searching, we need to cancel jobs that are already running, and then we can use that job to update the query. So we can have private val. So we can just call it job type job. We could make it nullable. Yeah, just have it as null. Now we can go and proceed and build. Just do this. We can proceed and build the function to load. So just init, and then we can say load books. Then just do this option enter, then create that function. So given this a coroutine, we need to launch. So view model scope dot launch. So we need to use these to build our books. So and once, of course, you're making anything cover the repository through the network, we might be expecting that anything could happen. So we need to wrap this in a try catch. So we can have exemption of an IO exemption for now, just a quick one. Then we now need to update the UI state, the exact value of the UI state in with the exact error here. So we're gonna say UI state dot value equal to the books UI state. Dot error, and our error here, we need to pass this message. Of course, we need to cast it as a string. Yeah, and we are done there. So on try, we can create a variable to keep track of the books. So val books will be now repository. Well, how do we call the repo here? Yeah, repository. So we can say val books equal to Okay, then I know the problem. Sorry, guys, it's bad. So you can now say repository dot get books, and then we now need to update the UI state with the values we have here. So we're gonna say books UI state book UI state dot success. So remember, our success here is expecting a list of books, and we're already fetching this from the repository. So if you go to the books repository, this one here, get books, it's expecting its return type is a list of books. This guy here. So we need now to say we need to pass our books here. And we are done with the load books. We could ideally implement the same function so that once we move from the view model, we are done. So we can say private function search book. We will just do by the title. So search book by query. So we can just say query. So remember, the query expects a string, query of type string. Yeah. So the first thing would be to update the search query dot value with our query equal to query. And then the next thing is working on an assumption that there was other previous jobs. So we can just can call it this one search job. So we can just cancel any running job before we update the job on the view model. So we're gonna say search job dot cancel. Yeah, it's a nullable. And then now we're gonna say our new search job will now be search job equal to we can now launch a coroutine here. Yeah, change this one to var. So we can say we can delete for maybe just 300 milliseconds, and then we can perform a try, then catch block. Sorry. Then we can get a general error of the IO exemption. So we can just update UI state dot value to books UI state book UI state dot error, and then pass in this error here. And remember, it's to string. So we are done up to that point. So what we're going to do is we can update UI state first to loading value is equal to books. So why we're using the loading state here is in case you delete or from the input field, so you delete the characters, and we can just show those books directly. So we can start with the UI state here for loading those books. So val books, I'm gonna say if query dot is blank or empty or whatever. So we can say the query is blank, then we're gonna say repository dot get books. Else, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use now the search. Just see repository dot search book, which expects a query, which we now have the query here. So you're just gonna pass the query here. So if you go to this search book, so remember it's taking in a string of type query and returning the list of the books as per the search query. Yes, so I think we're done up to there. So we can now update our state. So UI state dot value respectively. So book UI state dot success. Then for this success, we can now pass in our books. Yeah, so and we are done up to this point. So we've implemented the load books. So we've also directly implemented the search here. So we're just doing this on a mid level. So we don't want to make it complex. So as long as you now have the repo, you can go and implement it and add more features and make it fancy. So the next thing will be building so we can just add another package here called components. So we can now build the home component for the book cards. So another file, so we can just call this one book card component. It's a file, it's a composable file. So you're going to say book card component. Yes, correct. Keep in mind, this is the card component. So where is the screenshot? List of books, box list here. So we have this image taking in the entire height of the card. We have this column here. We won't focus for now with styling, typography, and everything. So and then the details. So the goal is to just walk you through how it works. So first we're gonna do a card, and our card. So let's not over-engineer a lot of things here. So card, we'll just say we need this card to take the entire width. So we'll be using modifier to fill max width. So we can actually add a preview just to see how this is looking like. So I'm just going to copy this, and then add a preview here. Preview. We can show the background, then make it true. So we can also add this here as a preview, and then remove these. Have this one as a book card component. So keep in mind also, we were recommended to use a sync image to load these images, but for preview, we can just use a direct image here. So you can have an image with a painter. So we can say painter, then painter resource r.drawable. Just pick any image. Of course, it will require content description. And just keep it as null for now. Then we can do content scale. Crop. So we can just crop content scale dot crop. So we want to zoom in only to the main part of the image. So that's why we're using the crop. Now, after the image, there is this column holding these guys here. So just gonna do here. So we're gonna we're gonna add a column first here, and inside this column, so we have a text. Actually, it's 3 texts. So just duplicate these 3 times. Then we can pass the book here, so that we're able to fetch these details. So the first one is the name, I think. So we're gonna say this one would be book.name. The next one looks like the author. So we're gonna say book.author. Then the other one is rating. So rating. So we can just say book.rating. Rating is not of type string, so we can just make it to string. So you can keep on adding this other stuff on the UI. So the other thing could be a button. So we're gonna have a button with on click. So on click for now, we can just leave it there. We will come to fix it later. And then the text here is details. Yes, details in quotes here. So remember, we need to wrap these inside a row. Then this way. So our preview would require a book for it to load. So ID we can have 1. Name you can have compound effect. For author, we can just put any author, so it's just for preview. And then the other one was on image URL, so we can just say HTTPS. The other thing was on description, we can say none for now. Then the other thing was on rating. So rating is a float type, 4.5. Just put something like that. The other thing will be a review count. It's an integer, so we can just say 100. It's been reviewed 100 times. Just let me rebuild this, the preview bit. So as that is done, we can just be confirming. Cool. So we can see now we have a better view and a better imagination of what we are building. Just zoom it a little bit. So it doesn't look really quite like the UI, but we need to push this button to the end. add some padding around the card and everything else. So we can first begin by giving our card a height. So we can just say modifier.height. So we can do 160 or 170 dps for now. So the next thing would be, if you look at the UI, everything is centered. So we can say inside this row, we can have vertical alignment is alignment dot center horizontally. So for this row, we can say modifier. We can since we our card fills maximum width and maximum height. So our modifier, our row modifier, can fill max size. Then all these other guys are centered in the middle. So we need these texts at the center. The same thing for the button and the image. So for the image, I think there was an aspect ratio of 2:3. So we can say modifier is equal to modifier dot aspect ratio of 2:3. Then we can say we can just say the modifier should fill max height. Yes. Okay, and then that is okay for now. So the next thing could be to center this. So we're going to say vertical alignment is alignment dot center vertically. Yes, these texts are now moving here. So we need to push this button to the end and add some padding around this card. So we can add some small padding around the row. So I'm going to say modifier dot padding. We can just add a padding of h.dp. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And then we need to give our column a weight of 1 so that it takes the entire space and leaves the button to the end, pushes the button to the end. So I'm going to say modifier dot weight of 1f. Yes, and then also just add a padding here. Dot padding as a padding start of maybe let's see how 8 will look like. Yeah, not bad. Yeah, so ideally, if you look at this, actually, you can add a 16 dp. It looks a little bit too close. Yeah, so if you look at this, we have the image and then this. So it's the image is clipped to I think rounded corner shape. So we can just say where is the image modifier dot clip to rounded corner shape of maybe 4.dp. A little bit more. You can have an 8 more, a 16. Yeah. So I think we're done. So now, okay, we need some spacing in this column. So we can have a vertical, actually horizontal. Horizontal, no, it's vertical arrangement, sorry. Vertical arrangement is arrangement dot, can space them by h.dp. It's not matching the exact UI, but yeah, well, we need to just get it done for now. That is it for now. So we can now switch from the image to now using the async image. And then just on the painter, we can just switch it now to the model and say, we don't need this guy here. We can just say book.image URL. Yeah, and we're done. So we can remove this preview. It's no longer needed. You can also close this tab here. Just scroll that here and then go back here to the file structures. So we're done building the component. So we now need to create a lazy column for this, just to load all these images. So we're going to create components done. So on the home screen, we're going to create a book screen. It's a composable file. So book screen. So first things first is we will need to use the view model. So view model is the book's UI view model. we need to get our UI state from this. So we're going to say val UI state is by view models dot UI state dot collector state. Same thing, we need to collect one for the search query. So search query. Then this one will be just do this vmodels.search query dot collector state. So we're done. So we need to import this to fix this error. Just import it. Yeah, and we are ideally done. So if you go here, we need to load these books, and then we have the outline search here. So we can actually even start with the search. We can just start it there. We can add the scaffold, but yeah, I hope you know how to use the scaffold. So the next thing here would be actually we can just use the scaffold. We can just create our own scaffold. But you should always do based on the interview. So we're going to add a top bar. We see top up bar is a composable. So we can just have a text saying books. Then we're going to need to now add padding values. Then we will need to show all this, everything else inside a column. And then this column of hours will take in a modifier of padding values. First pass in the padding values. Yes, and we will be set. So this one says opt-in for experimental. Then surround it with a lambda. Yes. We need this. We need this modifier of hours to fill the max size, and then add a padding. A padding of we can do a padding of 18. Usually it's almost 20, so just say 18. That's dp. Just format the files. Yeah, ideally we need to have some order, so just then put it here. So inside here, we will need to first, we need the loading state for this, and then error state and the success state for that. So first things is we can create another components, but you can choose to restructure the files later on. Just gonna do this. First thing is we need to create a composable for our loading. So we can just call it a loading component. This component. So because we need to center this, we can just put it inside a box, and then we're going to say the modifier dot fill max size. Then our alignment, content alignment, should be alignment dot center. We need to center that. And then for the loading, we can just use directly circular loading progress indicator. Something for error, just copy that, paste it here, and just say error component, box everything. So instead of now of that, we can just say we can decide to pass in a message so that we don't encode maybe the exact error. So we can just use the message of type string. Then we will pass it later on. Yeah. So this is done. This is okay. We now need a success one. Can create composable for books. So because we have now that is load component, then load books. So about my namings, you can always find better names. So for this, we will need to use a lazy column, and inside this lazy column, we will need to at least add some spacing between our components. So we can add vertical arrangement dot space by. We can space them by 8 pixels, 8 dp. Then we will need to load the items of this kind of list. Our lambda here, we can just call it book. Then we can now call in our card. How do we name our component? We call it book card component. Paste it here. Then yes, import. So remember, it's expecting a book of type book. So we need to pass in our book here. But given we need to get list of these books, we need to return the list. We're just going to wrap it inside that. So that on our item count, which expects a list, we're going to say, we can actually call it books. We're going to say books. Then our card component expects a book, which by default, it should be it, but we've decided to name it as book variable. And we are done. So we can now use a when statement to switch between the cases of a success, error, anything in our loop. So when we're going to switch around with the UI state. So when is books UI state dot, we don't want to start with error, of course, loading, then we can say, we can just display the loading component. So sorry, not that one. Going to say load component doesn't expect anything, so we had good there. So is we can do an error so that we can format our code a little bit easier. We're gonna say error component. So error is expecting a message, so we can actually use UI state as books UI state dot error. Then so this is okay, it needs some modifier, so we can just say can cast this exactly directly so that we don't message. So why we are using the named parameter argument is our component expects 2 parameters. So yes, we have one by default, but it's the first parameter here. So if you don't specify that, automatically it will think we are passing in the modifier again. So the final one would be is success. Then this is where we want to add some lambda here. So for this, we want to trigger load books. Remember, load books expects a list of books. So we're gonna say gonna use the UI state again as success dot books here. Yes. So well, I think that is it. So the other thing could be navigation. So we're going to create a new package. The package called it navigation. And inside navigation, we're just going to create one file. So app navigation. So you can ideally, it should be a file. You can ideally create the serializable routes outside, but for today, we're just going to put them inside one file. So we're going to say composable app navigation. So we don't need to pass any parameter for now, any of this for now. So we can create an object, a serialized object to hold in for our home. Also another one to hold in for the other screen, but that will come in later. So we want to create a value for nav controller. Nav controller equal to remember nav controller. And then so in our case, we will be using type C of navigation. So nav host. So this one with the K class. Okay, we haven't even created the nav host. Sorry, we're not yet there. So we're gonna say nav host with the start destination. So it takes in the nav controller and then our start destination as home. Then for the composables. So composable, we're going to use the one with K class. So this is the one that will allow us to handle the type safe navigations from here. We're going to start off with our home here. And then we're going to call in our book screen. So book screen expects a view model. So this view model, we can just inject it under Hilt view model. And then go back to where this is used. Now in navigation, we don't need to pass anything. So we are good up to there. So we can now go to our main activity. Already this is be done for you. Yes, this is already be done for you. Also the same thing on manifest. I'm going to just switch straight to Android manifest. They already done that for you. So it's already injected there. So back to our navigation. Actually, the main app UI. Yes. So instead of this, just gonna say app navigation. Yeah, then we can now launch our app, and hopefully we get some books from the UI. Loading state. Yeah, we now have books here. This is good. Of course, it doesn't look like the UI in the interview process, but yeah, basically that is how the interview was. So we can now add on click on these buttons. Although I would have preferred to add on click on the card, yeah, but we will do that for the UI. So on the book details, you can just quickly put in some. Okay, we've forgotten the search book, so we can finish up with the search. So back to the screens, book screen. So we are using a column, and we need our first guide to be an outlined text view. So we're gonna have a value. Our value will be our search query, and then on value change, we're gonna have, of course, it's a lambda. So I'm gonna say, so we're gonna say vmodel dot search. Now, how did we name it? Books vmodel private function for that. Yeah, we can just remove this accessibility for now. We'll just fix them later on. Dot search query book, and then our value here will be actually our updated value will be it. So we don't need to modify that. Yes, and then we can just add a modifier. Modifier equal to modifier dot fill max width. Yeah, you can just launch it, just test it first, and then yeah, you can improve on the UI. Yes, we have this, so we can search maybe something like new. Yeah, you can see the search is working, so we can search something like outlined. Outline, yeah. So the search is working. You can just add things like leading icon, trailing icon, and format everything else. So that is it for the search. You can also add some padding. So we can actually see on this outlined, can have padding bottom of age.dp. We can actually add a leading icon. Icon, you can take the image vector, then you can say icons dot default dot search. So you can just say search. I'm gonna have some content description, just say now. So if you run this now, we expect something better. Yeah, some little bit of padding and some search there. So we can have a placeholder here. So maybe placeholder is a composable text saying search book. So just run it. Yeah, so that's better. So we can now focus on the detail screen. So we go back here under home screen. So screens, we add another one to navigate to details. So new, so details. You can call it details screen. Composable details screen. So here we're expecting the details screen to have expecting to have it to have an image, the name and maybe description, so that we can just pass those parameters for now. So we are expecting to receive image URL of type string. We're also expecting the name of type string, and for now you can just say description of type string. So make sure you also follow the naming conventions. For mine are just for demo purposes. So on the column, we can have a modifier of just filling in max size. So if you don't know the basics of all this, you will need to really first go through the basics before you can do this. And then you can add a padding of 20.dp. And then remember, we add an image text. So we can just have an async image. where we can have the model as the image URL, content description as the name. Yes, so it's complaining here, not modifier, but the model. So we can also have a modifier. Then we can do a size for it, modifier.size. You can have it a height of maybe something like 150.dp, then a width of 200.dp. Yes, and then it required some text containing the name and also another text containing the description. So given that these might be scrollable, so we can add the remember scrollable, but first we can also have some vertical arrangement, space by maybe 12.dp. And then maybe for scroll state, so let's say scroll state is equals to remember scroll state. Then we can have here you can see vertical scroll is scroll state. So this will allow scroll state. This will allow a column to scroll through the description bit. So once we're done here, we can go now back to navigation, create another one here. So we can create a data class for details because we are needed to pass in some view parameters here. So we need to pass in the image URL. We also need to pass in name of type string. Also, this one is of type string. And then also ing image URL. The other one was a description. So you can just say description of type string. Yes, we are actually done. Val. Just remember to make it serializable class. Then here we can now come and say we have our composable of details. So let's just name it our book details. So we have some, how do we call them? So we have named keywords. So we don't want to import the wrong one. So we can just say book details. And then we're gonna have the book detail screen. I think we called it the detail screen. Yeah, it's expecting some characters here. So remember, in book screen, we need to pass, we need to make the button clickable first on the component. So on this card component, we need to pass in an on-click lambda, callback, on-click, of course it's lambda expression, just default type of unit. And on our button, on-click, we now need to call on-click. So we now need to call this guy to enable us to call it. So if you go now to the component, it will complain. Yes, it requires the on-click. So we can see here, on-click. So we can just pass in book of type book. Yeah, then it's just gonna return a unit. Then you're gonna say here. So actually, given that is the last parameter, we can just say on click. Yeah, you can just have it there as on click and then pass in the book. Yes, this book here. So instead of just putting a comma and having so given it's the last parameter, you can just put it outside. Then if you now go back to these load books, it will definitely complain. So we can add an on click here. So we can say, actually can just call it on navigate. So we carrying in 3 here. So I'll just say on navigate. Type unit. So we're carrying in 3 params here. So first one, second one, and third one. Then we can now come here and say, this one is, okay, then on navigate. So load books expects books list. So we can just say books equal to, and then on click actually it's load books. So actually we are doing it outside, should be inside. On click, so let's use named parameters. So on click, we are expecting to call on navigate. Yes, here. So we need to put this guy inside here. And then format it. So given we have, so we can say it dot image URL. The other one was it dot. We're expecting a name, and the last one was it dot description. Yeah, so we can carry over this to the next screen. Now on this other side, the data screen, so we've utilized that. We can now go back to our navigation here and say compose screen, not screen, but the book screen. So we can say we need an image URL. We do also need a name, and we do need a description. So what's going to happen here is, just a second, image URL and everything. So we're going to say on navigate, we're going to say nav controller dot navigate to away details, book details. How did we name it? Book details, yes, book details. And we need to carry over the image. Okay, all right, so image it's expecting, let's call it image URL name and description. Let's just call it the way it's, they are. So image URL, which will just now need to pass in image URL, the name, and the description. So actually, sorry, I'm putting these guys in the wrong place. Goodness. Yes. Then here we need to get the arguments. So args equal to its dot route, and we are routing them to the book details. So you can now come here and fetch the image URL as args dot image URL. The other one was name. What's it called? Name. Yes, name as args dot name. And the other guy was description. So we're going to say args dot description. Yeah, hopefully that works. Let's see. Hala, we are there. So we are now able to click and navigate to the screen. So you can improve on the UI and everything else. But basically, this is a level 1 interview. So I will also be sharing a level 2 interview for the same. So basically what they were testing is MVVM architecture. How do you structure your code? Are you able to use, are you familiar with these libraries, coil and everything? This was the score. Yeah, scored good. Scored a good number. I didn't score 100, but yeah, scored a good pass. So that's it, guys. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you. So I've already shared the repo on the comments, so you can check that.